The phone buzzed against my kitchen counter at exactly 9:42 in the evening. I was washing dishes, the warm water running over my hands while I scrubbed at a stubborn pasta stain. Outside, October rain drummed against the windows with that steady rhythm that usually helps me think. But when I glanced down at the screen and saw my father's name, something cold settled in my chest. The message was short, brutal in its simplicity. 7 words that would change everything between us forever. I left with your stepmom. We're not coming back. I stood there, dish soap dripping from my fingers, reading those words over and over until they burned themselves into my memory. No explanation, no context, no warmth. Just a sudden, cold declaration from a man who had once driven 3 states to fix my broken water heater. I set the phone down carefully, like it might explode if I moved too quickly. My hands were shaking. Not from anger, not yet, but from the kind of shock that comes when someone you love becomes a stranger in a single text message. The man who used to send me videos of his morning walks, who called every Sunday to check if I'd changed my oil, had just announced he was abandoning his life with the emotional warmth of a weather report. I picked up the phone again. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to call him immediately, to demand an explanation, to beg him to reconsider. Part of me wanted to type out everything I'd been holding back for the past year and a half. All the frustration about how she'd been pulling him away from me, how our family dinners had become tense negotiations, how holidays had turned into battles over whose traditions mattered more. Instead, I typed 2 words. Good luck. Then I hit send, and immediately regretted it. But honestly, what else was I supposed to say? I wasn't going to beg. Not this time. Not after watching my stepmother systematically dismantle the relationship between my father and me, one whispered comment at a time. Not after the canceled Christmas plans, the forgotten birthdays, the way he'd started looking past me whenever I tried to talk to him about anything important. The rain kept falling. I finished the dishes in silence, my mind spinning through 1,000 different scenarios. Where were they going? How long had they been planning this? And why did he think a text message was an appropriate way to tell his daughter that he was walking away from everything we'd built together? Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone face down on the nightstand like a loaded weapon I didn't want to touch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face from last Christmas, how small he'd looked sitting at the end of the table while she held court, telling stories about their new friends, their new interests, their new life that somehow didn't have room for me in it. Morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of October day that makes you want to stay under the covers forever. I dragged myself to the coffee maker, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still trying to process what had happened. The house felt different somehow, emptier, as if his text message had reached through the phone and stolen something from my living room. That's when I heard the cars. 2 police cruisers pulled into my driveway at 7:15 in the morning, their red and blue lights painting my walls in colors that made my stomach twist. I watched from the window as 2 officers stepped out, their faces serious, official, the kind of expression that never brings good news to your doorstep. The older officer knocked firmly but not aggressively. When I opened the door, still clutching my coffee mug like a shield, he removed his hat with practiced courtesy. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Hamilton. This is Officer Rodriguez. We need to speak with you about a complaint that's been filed." My mind immediately went to the worst places. Had something happened to my father? Had there been an accident? But then Officer Hamilton continued, his voice careful and measured. "Your father has filed a report claiming that you've stolen from him. He says you froze his bank accounts and changed the locks on property that belongs to him." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stepped backward, my free hand gripping the doorframe for support. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Officer Rodriguez, younger with kind eyes, stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, we know this is difficult, but we need to get your side of the story. Can we come in for a few minutes?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, and led them into my living room. The same living room where my father had watched football games, where he'd helped me assemble furniture, where we'd shared quiet conversations after my mother's funeral. Now it felt like a crime scene. Hamilton pulled out a small notebook. According to the complaint filed in Miami, you've frozen multiple bank accounts and prevented your father from accessing his own property. He also claims you changed the locks on the family home without his knowledge or consent. Miami. The word stuck in my throat. He was in Miami, filing police reports, painting me as some kind of financial predator. The man who had raised me, who had taught me the difference between right and wrong, was now telling strangers that I was a thief. "Officers," I said, setting down my coffee cup with trembling hands. "I can explain everything, but it's complicated." Rodriguez leaned forward. "We're here to listen, ma'am. Take your time." I took a deep breath, trying to organize thoughts that felt scattered like leaves in a hurricane. First, yes, I froze some of his accounts, but they're accounts that were originally set up with my mother before she died. Accounts that I have legal authority over as executor of her estate. Second, I changed the locks on my house, not his. The house my mother left to me in her will. Hamilton scribbled notes. "And why did you take these actions?" I pulled out my phone, hands still shaking. "Because of this." I showed them the text message from the night before. He texted me at 9:42 last night, saying he'd left with my stepmother and they weren't coming back. No explanation, no discussion, just abandonment. The officers exchanged glances. Rodriguez read the message twice. "That's pretty abrupt," he said quietly. "It gets worse," I continued. "My stepmother has been trying to gain access to my mother's estate for months. She's made comments about how I don't deserve the house, how it should belong to my father and therefore to her. She's tried twice to get keys made without my permission." Hamilton looked up from his notes. "So these actions you took, freezing accounts and changing locks, you saw them as protective measures?" "Exactly. If someone texts you that they're abandoning their life and never coming back, and that someone has a spouse who's been trying to get their hands on your inheritance, what would you do? Just leave everything wide open for them to take?" Rodriguez nodded slowly. "That makes sense from your perspective, but your father obviously sees it differently." "My father," I said, the words tasting bitter, "hasn't been seeing things clearly for a while now. He's been forgetting appointments, misplacing important documents, getting confused about dates. I mentioned it to my stepmother once, gently, and she told me to stop meddling." Hamilton's expression shifted. "Are you suggesting there might be some cognitive decline?" I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. "I don't know, maybe. All I know is that the man who raised me would never handle a major life decision through a text message. He would never file a police report without talking to me first. This isn't him." The officers spent another 20 minutes taking my statement, copying relevant documents, and asking detailed questions about the timeline of events. When they finally stood to leave, Hamilton handed me his card. "Ma'am, we're going to close this complaint on our end. Based on what you've shown us, you haven't committed any crimes. But," he paused, his expression growing concerned, "something about this whole situation doesn't sit right with me. Your father sounded confused when he called it in, like he wasn't entirely sure why he was calling." Rodriguez nodded. "If I were you, I'd consider checking on him. Not to confront anyone, just to make sure he's safe." After they left, I sat in my quiet living room, surrounded by the echoes of their questions and my own inadequate answers. The rain had stopped, but the gray sky pressed down like a weight on my chest. My phone sat on the coffee table, silent now, but somehow still threatening. I thought about my father as he used to be. Strong, decisive, the kind of man who could fix anything with the right tools and enough patience. The man who had held my hand at my mother's funeral, who had promised we'd take care of each other, who had meant every word when he said it. That man wouldn't have sent that text. That man wouldn't have filed a police report without talking to me first. That man wouldn't have let anyone convince him that his daughter was his enemy, which meant either my father had changed completely or someone was changing him. I picked up my phone and opened a flight booking website. If they wanted to play games, if they wanted to paint me as the villain in this story, then maybe it was time I showed up to defend myself. Miami wasn't that far away, and I had questions that needed answers. The cursor blinked in the departure city field, waiting for me to make a choice that would determine everything that happened next. I booked the flight without hesitation. One way to Miami, departing in 3 hours. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but sometimes falling is the only way forward when the ground beneath you has already cracked. The drive to the airport gave me time to think, which turned out to be both a blessing and a curse. My mind kept circling back to the phone call Officer Hamilton had mentioned. My father, confused and uncertain, filing a report against his own daughter. The image of him sitting in some Miami police station, stumbling over words, being coached by her whispered instructions, made my chest ache. I'd packed light. A small carry-on with enough clothes for a few days, my laptop, and a folder containing copies of every legal document that proved my right to protect what was mine. Bank records, my mother's will, property deeds, power of attorney papers. If this was going to be a battle, I wanted ammunition. The flight was mercifully short, but every minute felt like an hour. I stared out the window at clouds that looked like cotton balls scattered across blue fabric, trying to imagine what I'd find when I landed. Would my father even agree to see me? Would she let him? Had they already emptied his accounts and disappeared to some place I'd never find them? Miami International Airport buzzed with the kind of energy that comes from people constantly arriving and departing, lives intersecting for brief moments before spinning off in different directions. I felt invisible walking through the crowds, just another face with a story no one else would understand. The taxi driver was chatty, pointing out landmarks and asking if this was my first time visiting. I gave him polite responses while my stomach twisted itself into knots. Through the windows, palm trees swayed in warm air that should have felt like vacation, but instead felt like stepping into someone else's nightmare. The hotel I'd found online was decent but not extravagant, the kind of place business travelers choose when someone else is paying. I checked in quickly, dropped my bag in a room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and ocean air, then pulled out my phone to call Detective Alvarez at the Miami Beach Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. She answered on the third ring, her voice professional but not unkind. Detective Alvarez, Financial Crimes. Detective, my name is Sarah Taylor. I believe you may have had contact with my father regarding some financial concerns. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Mr. Robert Taylor? Yes, we've had several interactions with him in the past 48 hours. Are you the daughter he mentioned? My throat tightened. What exactly did he say about me? He filed a complaint claiming you'd frozen his accounts and locked him out of property. But, her tone shifted slightly, there were some inconsistencies in his story. He seemed confused about basic details, and there was a woman with him who answered most of our questions for him. The woman, my stepmother, playing puppet master while my father sat there like a marionette. Detective, I flew down here because I'm worried about him. Not just financially, but mentally. He's been acting strangely for months. I was hoping you'd call, Alvarez said. Can you come in this afternoon? I'd like to hear your side of this story. The Miami Beach Police Department was a modern building with glass walls that reflected the afternoon sun in sharp angles. Inside, Detective Alvarez turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with intelligent eyes and the kind of calm demeanor that probably came from hearing every possible variation of family financial drama. She led me to a small conference room and offered coffee, which I accepted gratefully. My hands needed something to hold, something to keep them from shaking as I told her everything. The gradual changes in my father's behavior, my stepmother's increasingly bold attempts to access my mother's estate, the text message that had started this whole nightmare. Your father tried to open 3 new credit accounts yesterday morning, Alvarez said, sliding a printed report across the table. Different banks, all within a 2-hour window. When the third bank asked him to verify his birth date, he had to check with the woman accompanying him. I stared at the paper, seeing my father's signature scrawled at the bottom of each application. The handwriting looked shaky, uncertain. He forgot his own birthday? Or he was being coached by someone who didn't know it, Alvarez said quietly. We see this pattern more often than you'd think. Older adults being manipulated by people they trust, isolated from family members who might notice the warning signs. The room felt suddenly cold, despite the Miami heat pressing against the windows. Is there anything you can do? We can investigate, but we have to be careful. Your father is an adult with rights, even if those rights are being influenced by someone else. However, she leaned forward, if we can establish that he's being financially exploited, that changes everything. She handed me a card with her direct number. They're staying at the Ocean View Resort on Collins Avenue. We've been monitoring the situation, but so far everything they've done has been technically legal. Questionable, but legal. I took the card, my fingers tracing the embossed letters. What if I went to see him? Would that help or make things worse? Alvarez considered this carefully. It could go either way. If he's truly being manipulated, seeing you might break through whatever story he's been told. But if the manipulation is deep enough, he might see you as the threat they've convinced him you are. The drive to the Ocean View Resort took 20 minutes through Miami Beach traffic that moved like honey in winter. Palm trees lined the streets, their fronds rustling in the ocean breeze, and everywhere I looked, people seemed relaxed, carefree, living the kind of life my father had always said he wanted when he retired. The resort was everything you'd expect from a place that charged $300 a night. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staff members who glided rather than walked. I approached the front desk with my heart hammering against my ribs. I'm looking for my father, Robert Taylor, I told the young man behind the counter. I'm concerned about his well-being. The desk clerk's expression shifted from professional courtesy to something more guarded. I'm sorry, but I can't provide information about our guests without proper identification and their consent. I pulled out my driver's license and a copy of my father's emergency contact information, documents that showed I was listed as his next of kin. Please, I just flew in from Ohio. The police are already aware of the situation. He studied the papers, then excused himself to speak with a manager. I stood there in the opulent lobby, watching wealthy tourists drift past with shopping bags and drinks that came with little umbrellas, feeling completely out of place in my jeans and anxiety. The manager who approached me was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of practiced sympathy that comes from dealing with family crises in five-star settings. Ms. Taylor, I'm Margaret Santos, the guest services manager. I understand you're concerned about your father. Yes, he's been acting strangely, and I believe he may be in a vulnerable state. The Miami Beach Police Department is already investigating some financial irregularities. Margaret nodded slowly. We've noticed some unusual activity as well. Your father has been signing for charges he doesn't seem to understand, and there's been another guest who's been spending considerable time with him and his wife. Someone who isn't registered under their reservation. My pulse quickened. Another guest? A man in his 40s, Victor something. He's been charging meals and drinks to your father's room, but when our staff asks your father about it, he seems confused about who the man is. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. My stepmother hadn't just isolated my father from me, she'd brought someone else into the equation. Someone who was helping her drain his accounts while keeping him confused and compliant. Can you tell me what room he's in? I asked. Margaret hesitated. I can't give you that information directly, but I can have security conduct a wellness check. If your father is willing to see you, we can arrange a meeting in one of our private conference rooms. 30 minutes later, I sat in a small meeting room overlooking the ocean, watching waves crash against the beach in endless repetition. The sound was supposed to be soothing, but my nerves were wound too tight for any kind of peace. When the door opened, my father walked in alone. For a moment, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, his clothes hung loose on his frame, and his eyes had a glassy quality that made my heart sink. But when he saw me, something flickered across his face. Recognition followed immediately by confusion. Sarah. His voice was smaller than I remembered, uncertain. "Hi, Dad." I stood up slowly, not wanting to startle him. "I came because I was worried about you." He looked toward the door as if expecting someone else to follow him in. "She said you wouldn't come. She said you were too angry with me." The way he said "she" told me everything I needed to know. My stepmother had been preparing him for this moment, planting seeds of doubt about my motives, making sure he'd see me as the enemy rather than the daughter who'd flown across the country because she loved him. "I'm not angry, Dad. I'm scared. Scared for you." He sat down across from me, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the polished table. "I don't understand what's happening," he whispered. "Everything feels confused. She says you're trying to steal from me, but I can't remember why I would think that." Those words hit me like a physical blow. My father, the man who had always been so sharp, so certain about everything, admitting that his own thoughts felt foreign to him. "Dad, what's the last clear memory you have? The last time you felt like yourself?" He closed his eyes, concentrating with visible effort. "Christmas," he said finally. "Christmas dinner at your house. You made Mom's stuffing recipe, and I told you stories about when you were little. That felt real." Christmas. 8 months ago, before my stepmother had really ramped up her campaign to separate us, before the confusion and the financial irregularities and the slow, systematic dismantling of everything we'd built together. "Dad, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you do that?" He nodded, his eyes focusing on mine with an intensity I hadn't seen in months. "I never tried to steal from you. I protected accounts that legally belong to me, accounts from Mom's estate. And I'm here now because I love you, and because I think someone is taking advantage of you." Tears began forming in his eyes, and for a moment I saw the father I remembered. Strong, proud, but also vulnerable in the way that comes from loving someone completely. "I want to come home," he whispered. "I don't understand this place, and I don't understand these people, and I just want to come home." Home. Those words broke something open inside my chest. The way he said home, with such desperate longing, like a lost child asking for his mother. I reached across the table and took his trembling hands in mine, feeling how thin they'd become, how the wedding ring from my mother hung loose on his finger now. "We can make that happen, Dad. But first I need to ask you some hard questions. Can you handle that?" He nodded, straightening slightly as if drawing on some reserve of the man he used to be. "Where is she right now? Your wife?" His brow furrowed. "She went to get something from the room. She said she'd be right back, but that was—" He glanced at his watch, confusion clouding his features again. "I don't remember when she left." "And the man who's been with you both, Victor?" Dad's expression shifted to something almost like fear. "He makes me nervous. She says he's helping us, but I don't understand with what. He keeps asking me to sign papers, and when I hesitate, she tells me not to worry about details." The picture was becoming clearer and more horrifying by the minute. They weren't just stealing from him. They were systematically breaking down his ability to think for himself, to question what was happening around him. "Dad, do you remember trying to open new credit accounts yesterday?" He stared at me blankly. "Credit accounts? No, We went to a bank, but I thought we were just checking our balance." "You signed applications at 3 different banks." "I signed something," he admitted, his voice growing smaller. "She said it was routine paperwork. I didn't read it carefully because she said I didn't need to." Margaret Santos knocked gently on the door, then entered with an expression of practiced concern. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development. Hotel security has been monitoring the situation, and we've discovered that charges are still being made to your father's room, even though he's been down here with you for the past hour." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of charges?" "Room service to a different room, spa services, charges at our gift shop. Someone is using his account information while he's sitting right here." Dad looked between us, bewildered. "I don't understand. How can someone use my account if I'm here?" Margaret and I exchanged glances. "Mr. Taylor, do you have your wallet with you?" He patted his pockets. Then his face went pale. "I thought I left it in the room, but she said she'd keep it safe for me." The systematic nature of it hit me like a sledgehammer. They hadn't just isolated him mentally and emotionally. They'd taken physical control of his financial tools. He couldn't buy food, couldn't pay for anything, couldn't even prove his identity without going through them. "Dad, I need you to think very carefully. When was the last time you actually held your own wallet?" He closed his eyes, concentrating with visible effort. "I remember having it when we checked in, but after that..." He trailed off, looking lost. "She said it would be safer with her. She said I might lose it." Margaret cleared her throat. "There's something else you should know. We've had to flag several attempted transactions because the signatures didn't match your father's on file. Someone has been practicing his signature, but not very well." The room felt like it was spinning. Forgery on top of everything else. I pulled out my phone and called Detective Alvarez, putting her on speaker so Margaret could hear. "Detective, it's Sarah Taylor. I'm at the hotel with my father, and we've discovered that someone is actively using his financial information while he's been sitting here with me. They also appear to be forging his signature." Alvarez's voice came through crisp and professional. "We've been monitoring the situation from our end as well. Your stepmother and Victor Larson just attempted to withdraw a significant amount of cash from your father's account at a bank downtown. The transaction was flagged because they couldn't answer basic security questions." Dad's face crumpled. "Victor Larson? That's his full name? She never told me his last name. She just said he was a friend who was helping us enjoy our vacation." "Mr. Taylor," Alvarez said gently through the phone, "we need you to understand that you're the victim of financial elder abuse. These people have been systematically stealing from you while making you believe you were willing participants." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my father process this information, saw the moment when understanding and humiliation crashed over him like a wave. His shoulders sagged, and he put his head in his hands. "I've been such a fool," he whispered. "No, Dad, you've been targeted by professionals. This isn't your fault." Margaret leaned forward. "Mr. Taylor, we have security footage that shows your wife and Mr. Larson in situations that would be very difficult for you to explain away. They've been intimate in public areas of the hotel while you were sleeping or otherwise occupied." The words hit him like physical blows. I watched my proud father crumble as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Not just financial theft, but personal betrayal of the deepest kind. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Based on the footage, since the day you arrived," Margaret said softly. Detective Alvarez spoke from the phone. "Mr. Taylor, we have enough evidence to arrest both of them on multiple charges, but we need your cooperation. Are you willing to press charges?" Dad lifted his head, and for the first time since I'd arrived in Miami, I saw a flash of the man who had raised me. The man who believed in right and wrong, who had taught me to stand up for myself, who had never let anyone take advantage of his family. "Yes," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Yes, I want to press charges." "We're moving in now," Alvarez said. "They're currently at First National Bank on Ocean Drive, attempting to access a safety deposit box. Stay where you are until we give you the all clear." The phone went silent. Margaret excused herself to coordinate with hotel security, and I sat there with my father in a conference room overlooking the ocean, watching him slowly reassemble the pieces of his dignity. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm so sorry for all of this. For the text message, for the police report, for believing her lies about you. Dad, she's a professional manipulator. She knew exactly how to isolate you, how to make you doubt yourself, how to turn you against the people who actually love you." He nodded slowly. "She started small. Little comments about how you seemed controlling, how you were trying to take over Mom's legacy. She made it sound like she was protecting me from you, when really she was protecting herself from me figuring out what she was doing. The psychological manipulation had been just as calculated as the financial theft. Every seed of doubt, every whispered concern, every gentle suggestion that I was the real threat. It had all been designed to cut him off from his support system so she could work without interference. "When did you start feeling confused about things?" I asked. He rubbed his temples. "A few months after we got married. Little things at first. I'd forget where I put my keys, or I'd lose track of what day it was. She said it was normal aging, but she also started taking over more and more tasks, paying bills, managing appointments, even ordering for me at restaurants because she said I was getting too flustered with decisions." The systematic dismantling of his independence had been so gradual that he hadn't recognized it as abuse. She'd convinced him that his confusion was natural, while simultaneously creating more confusion by controlling every aspect of his daily life. Margaret returned with a security guard. "The police have made contact with your stepmother and Mr. Larson. They're being detained for questioning. Detective Alvarez asked me to tell you that you're safe to move around the hotel now, but she'd like you to remain available for additional questions." Dad looked at me with eyes that seemed clearer than they had in months. "What happens now?" "Now we go home," I said. "We get you checked out medically to make sure this confusion isn't something more serious, and we start rebuilding everything they tried to tear down." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I missed you so much. Even when I was angry, even when I believed what she was telling me, some part of me missed my daughter." The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. "I missed you too, Dad. So much." We sat there holding hands across a hotel conference table, while outside, the Miami police arrested the woman who had nearly succeeded in stealing not just my father's money, but his mind, his independence, and his relationship with me. The next few hours passed in a blur of police interviews, paperwork, and phone calls. Detective Alvarez arrived at the hotel with news that painted an even darker picture than we'd imagined. Victor Larson had a history of targeting older men through romantic partners. They'd run this same scheme in 3 other states, always moving on before authorities could build a case. "Your stepmother isn't just an opportunist," Alvarez explained as we sat in the hotel manager's office. "She's part of an organized network. They identify wealthy widowers, establish romantic relationships, then systematically isolate and exploit them." Dad listened to all of this with a mixture of shame and growing anger. How many other men have they done this to? At least 6 that we know of. Your case is actually going to help us connect the dots on several cold cases in other jurisdictions. The scope of it was staggering. My father wasn't just a victim, he was one link in a chain of victimized elderly men who had been targeted, manipulated, and robbed by professional criminals who specialized in exploiting loneliness and grief. As evening approached, we finally returned to Dad's hotel room to pack his belongings. The space felt different now, contaminated by the knowledge of what had been happening there. His clothes were neatly folded, but mixed in with them were items that clearly belonged to her. Expensive jewelry, designer handbags, clothes with tags still attached. "She was shopping with my money," Dad said quietly, holding up a silk scarf that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. "Dad, look at this!" I'd found a notebook hidden under some magazines. Page after page of practice signatures, my father's name written over and over in slightly different hands. Some attempts were close, others were obviously fake, but the dedication to perfecting the forgery was chilling. He stared at the notebook like it was evidence of his own foolishness. "How did I not see any of this?" "Because you weren't supposed to see it. They're experts at hiding in plain sight, at making their victims complicit in their own victimization." We packed in silence after that, both of us processing the magnitude of what we'd discovered. As we prepared to leave for the airport, Dad turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since I was a child. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "Do you think I'm losing my mind? The confusion, the memory problems, the way I let them manipulate me. Do you think there's something seriously wrong with me?" It was the question I'd been dreading, but also the one that might determine how we moved forward. I think you've been under tremendous psychological stress, and I think that stress has been deliberately induced by people who knew exactly what they were doing. But Dad, we need to have you evaluated by a doctor who specializes in cognitive health. Not because I think you're losing your mind, but because we need to rule out any underlying conditions that might have made you more vulnerable. He nodded, accepting the wisdom in that approach. Will you come with me to those appointments? Dad, I'll come with you to every appointment for the rest of your life if that's what you need. As our plane lifted off from Miami International Airport, I looked down at the city lights spreading out below us like scattered diamonds. Somewhere down there, my former stepmother and Victor Larson were sitting in jail cells, their carefully constructed scheme unraveling under police scrutiny. But the real victory wasn't their arrest. The real victory was the man sitting beside me, my father, who had found his way back to himself despite everything they'd done to break him down. He still had a long road ahead: medical evaluations, therapy, rebuilding his confidence and independence, but he was no longer facing that road alone. The flight attendant offered us drinks. Dad ordered coffee, black, the same way he'd been drinking it for 40 years. Such a small thing, making his own choice about something as simple as coffee, but I saw it as a sign that he was already beginning to reclaim the pieces of himself that had been stolen. "Sarah," he said as the plane leveled off above the clouds, "when we get home, I want to go through all of Mom's things with you. The photos, the letters, everything we've been avoiding because it hurt too much. I want to remember her properly, without anyone else's interpretation of what those memories should mean." I reached over and took his hand. "I'd like that, Dad. I'd like that very much." Below us, Miami shrank to nothing more than lights on the darkness, and ahead of us waited home, healing, and the slow, careful work of rebuilding a relationship that had almost been lost forever. Sometimes the people we love most become strangers overnight, not because they stop caring, but because someone else teaches them to stop trusting. My father's story isn't unique. Thousands of elderly Americans fall victim to financial predators every year, isolated from family by professionals who know exactly how to exploit grief and loneliness. If someone you love starts pulling away, if their behavior changes suddenly, don't stop reaching out. Trust your instincts. Sometimes protecting the people we love means fighting for them even when they can't fight for themselves.